Hey everyone! So one of my favorite things about having a garden is getting to have other people come over and hang out in my garden. And most of the people that I have over here either don't garden themselves or they maybe have one or two pots, but basically they're either very new to it or have not gardened at all, which is fun because they have a ton of questions for me. And what got me thinking about the idea for this video is that I was getting some questions from my friends where my first instinct was, well, that's a really silly question. How would you not know that? And then you think back to when I started, and I realized the questions weren't actually as silly as I thought because one, either I didn't know the answer to that question before I started gardening, or two, it's not really that simple of an answer. So I thought it'd be fun to go through some of the questions that I kind of had that feeling with at first, where I thought it was much sillier of a question than it actually ended up being. And if you've got any questions kind of in this whole realm of silly garden questions that don't seem to be that silly after all, let me know in the comments below. But the first one that I have on my list, which is what really kind of spurred the whole idea for this video, was I had one of my friends over and her daughter, who I think is, did she just turn 5? I think she just turned 5, and they were looking at all of my plants, and of course the daughter was really taken with the strawberry plant, as I feel like every child is. And so I was recommending it to her that she should definitely get a strawberry plant for her yard. Kids would love it. They're really easy to grow and take care of. And she asked me, so when it rains, do you take it inside so that it doesn't get damaged? And of course my first instinct was, well, no, of course not. Like, how do you think plants get watered? But then when I was thinking about it a little bit more, the rain actually did destroy a lot of my plants this spring, completely killed some of them from root rot. So that happened with bulbs and plants that I had that already started growing. And I actually did take some plants inside when it was raining a lot this spring to prevent them from dying. So the answer wasn't really as simple and straightforward. Now, my friend didn't care to have all that information, so I basically told her, no, you can pretty much leave it out in the rain. But it really got me thinking that there really isn't a simple answer to that, because I did, in the past, bring plants inside. I will probably do that again next spring. I really only have the issue with root rot really in the spring when it's still cold and we get a lot of rain. But yeah, I took plants inside. I pushed plants underneath the raised beds to prevent the rain from getting to them. This winter, when I'm overwintering, kind of going into spring, I'm planning to either overwinter in a little miniature greenhouse this time, much shorter, or covering some of the pots, especially with bulbs, with saran wrap. So I am thinking about ways to keep the rain from killing my plants. So that was the one that kind of got me started, because I was about to give her like a really simple answer and my brain started turning, thinking about there really is a lot more to that question. So that was number one. My second one, kind of related, which then is a much more complicated answer, is do you water every day? And the answer is not a simple yes or no. So sometimes, depends on the weather, depends on if it rained, depends on the pot size, depends on the size of the plant, depends on the water needs of the plant. And again, that's not really information that somebody who's just asking a simple question about getting started really wants to know. But the answer, of course, is do you water every day is it depends. I don't know if I really turned on my irrigation system at all until June, late June, I think, because we had so much rain in the spring. But now it's August, it's very hot, and sometimes I'm watering, well, some plants I have to water twice a day, and sometimes I'm running my whole irrigation twice a day. So even really easy questions that should be simple to answer, like how often do you water, are very tricky questions when you actually start to think about the answer. Oh, next on my list, and this is actually a question that a few of my friends and my husband did have. So when my friend was over with her daughter, I was picking flowers to make a little bouquet for them to take home, and they thought I was so nice because they thought when I took the flower, no more flowers grew from that plant. So like I was giving them my only zinnia from that flower to take home. But really, when I cut a flower, I get many, many more flowers. So it's still obviously kind to give away bouquets, but not as kind of as it would have been if I gave them the only flowers I had in my garden. So I let them know that no, of course not. If you take home the flowers that I cut for you, my plants will continue to make more flowers. In fact, it's good for the majority of the flowers in my garden that I continue to cut them so they continue to make more and more flowers. And I think that's something that I kind of thought about too when I was little. Like if I picked a plant or a flower when I was like walking down the street, that I thought maybe that was the only flower that that plant ever grew. So just some things like that you think about that you kind of forget you didn't know once you really get into gardening. Next on my list was, do you kill the wasps? So a lot of my friends will come over, and obviously some insects are much nicer to us than others when we're kind of in their territory. And so when my friends were over and they saw the wasps, they said, oh, well, do you kill them? Now, of course not. They are pollinators, but I think really before I started gardening, I knew that bees were pollinators, and I think that was pretty much it. So like wasps, which I see one flying at me now, and I'm trying not to get too afraid of it, even though they still make my heart beat a little bit faster. So wasps I knew were scary when I was little. That was it. They were scary. I would run away from them. I really didn't think about the fact that just like bees, they were also pollinators. Now I was afraid of bees as well. I think I've kind of gotten over my fear of bees from gardening, but I will still run from wasps. However, I've never been stung, and I think that kind of plays into my whole fear because I don't know what it's like to be stung. So in my head, it's probably much worse than it actually would be. But who knows? Other things I didn't know were pollinators were flies. I have a ton of flies in my garden. They're probably the most popular pollinator I typically have. Butterflies. Basically, there were so many insects that I never knew were pollinators. And when you grow up and you're not really gardening a lot and you see the wasps and everyone says, oh, there's a wasp nest, you have to go spray it, you just get in your mind that those are bad insects and the only thing to do with the bad insects is to kill them. And now I definitely appreciate them, even though I will still be slightly afraid of them. Next on my list is, do you do anything after planting? So I loved this question because in my head I was like, oh, I wish. And I will say though, you don't have to do a ton of maintenance. Like I probably do more maintenance than I need to. I definitely start to slack on maintenance as the growing season goes on and my plants still live. But wouldn't it be so amazing if you could just plant a plant, never do anything, and it stayed in optimal health? So I think even if I had planted, like I'm trying to think of my zinnias, for example, and never deadheaded, like I might not get as many zinnias, but it still would probably live, other than, you know, obviously needing to water if it hasn't been raining. But if I stopped fertilizing, if I stopped deadheading, if I stopped, what else do I do? If I stopped like removing the dead leaves or scraping around the soil to get all the leaves off so that pests weren't hiding underneath it. So if I wasn't doing that stuff, I think my plants for the most part would still be alive, just maybe not in as best condition or as productive as they are now. But it definitely isn't just for me something I plant and then forget about it, although I would love that as well. But yeah, I do find that as the season goes on, like right now in August, I'm kind of starting to like forget to prune my tomato plant, and it's kind of taking over the flowers next to it, but they're all still there. So overall, I think they're still doing pretty well. The next question, actually I'll kind of combine these two together because I always find this interesting as well, because we kind of, I think, forget where the food we get from the store starts from. But I've had people come over and like I will take a strawberry, for example, off the plant and eat it, and they'll be like, did you just eat that, one, without washing it, and two, don't bugs crawl on your plants? And I think to myself, well, yes, but they crawl on the plants everywhere. I mean, unless they're grown in like a very sterile sort of environment. But pretty much bugs are all over everything in nature. And as far as needing to wash them, I know what I'm using in my garden, and there's nothing that I'm spraying on the garden that would be harmful to ingest. Now I will see if there's a bug on it before I eat it. I will see if there's any caterpillar eggs on something before I eat it. And I'd say for the most part, if I'm taking like a lot of herbs inside, or I'm taking a lot of tomatoes and peppers and all of that inside at once, I will give it a rinse before I start cooking with them. But I also eat a lot of stuff just off of the plant without rinsing it, and that's always turned out to be just fine. So I think as long as you know what you're putting on your plants, you're pretty much good to go. But I always found that interesting when I would like shock people by just taking, a tomato or a strawberry right off the plant and popping it into my mouth. So the last question on my list that I've actually gotten from a couple friends is, did I have to take classes to learn how to grow all of this? And no, you do not have to take a class to garden. I think when a lot of my friends come over, I have a lot jammed into a small area, so it might seem like it takes a lot of knowledge, but it's one of those things where you just start with whatever knowledge you have. I said this before, but you'll be amazed at how much you learn very quickly, but also knowing there's so much more to learn. But I learn the best when I'm actually in it doing it. I think even if I had taken a class before I really started gardening, I don't think it would have helped, because I did end up taking an online home horticulture class, I think is what it was called, from Oregon State University, that I asked for a Christmas gift. Yes, that is what I asked for Christmas, was a gardening class. But I took that a couple years after I'd already started gardening, and for me that was incredibly helpful because what they were talking about in the class I already had some baseline knowledge of. I think if I'd gone into it not having any idea of what they were talking about, it probably wouldn't have sunk in as much as it does when I actually have some experience. So I say, well, one, you definitely don't need classes. Nobody does. But I like the classes as just kind of an extra layer of some more advanced information. But I would still have all of these plants in this garden that look just like this without ever taking a class. Now, that doesn't mean that I haven't looked up information. I just haven't gotten it through a specific, like, formal class environment. But I started with plants, pots, soil, and a bunch of Googling. And that's basically taken me to where I am today. So I mean, I can't even imagine some of the stuff that I've had to look up, especially random looking creatures on my plants that back before the internet, which I do still remember a time before the internet, that you would just have no idea what it was, or you'd have to go down to the library or find it in a book or find a master gardener in the area, where now I can take a photo and ask Google what it is, and there's a bunch of results that come back to me. So it is kind of insane how much information we have at our fingertips now, and you definitely do not need to take a class in order to be a successful gardener. I do have plans to take more classes in the future, just because, again, I kind of want to understand more of the biology, I guess, of it, more of the scientific side of it, because I can see what's happening, but I don't necessarily know a lot of the why certain things are happening. I think that'd be fun to learn more about. But no, I did not take any classes before I got started. Have taken classes since and plan to take some more, but you do not need to take classes to have a beautiful garden. So that is all of the questions on my list. Let me know if you've had any of those questions where, you know, kind of at first glance you think, oh, that's a silly question, but really it's much more complicated, or it's just something that no one really knows until you get started. But I would love to hear some of the questions you've been asked about your garden down in the comments below. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.